The Western Philosophy, Chapter 11, Section 3, John Dwey, Paragraph 1, Education. After all, pragmatism was not quite an American philosophy. It did not catch the spirit of the greater America that lay south and west of the New England states. It was a highly moralistic philosophy and betrayed the Puritanic origins of its author. It talked in one breath of practical results and matters of fact, and in the next it leaped with the speed of hope from earth to heaven. It began with a healthy reaction against metaphysics and epistemology, and one expected from it a, a philosophy of nature and of society, but it ended as an almost apologetic plea for the intellectual respectability of everyday belief. When would philosophy learn to leave to religion these perplexing problems of another life, and to psychology these subtle difficulties of the knowledge process, and give itself with all its strength to the illumination of human purposes and the coordination and elevation of human life. Circumstances left nothing undone to prepare John Dewey to satisfy these needs and to outline a philosophy that should express the spirit of an informed and conscious America. He was born in the effete East in Burlington, Vermont, 1859, and had his schooling there as if to absorb the old culture before adventuring into the new. But soon he took Greeley's counsel and went west, teaching philosophy at the universities of Minnesota, 1888 to 9, Michigan, 1889 to 94, and Chicago, 1894 to 1904. Only then did he return east to join and later to head the Department of Philosophy at Columbia University. In his first 20 years, the Vermont environment gave him that almost rustic simplicity which characterizes him even now that all the world acclaims him. And then in his 20 years in the Middle West, he saw that vast America of which the Eastern mind is so proudly ignorant. He learned its limitations and its powers, and when he came to write his own philosophy, he gave to his students and his readers an interpretation of the sound and the simple naturalism which underlies the superficial superstition of the provinces of America. He wrote the philosophy as white men wrote the poetry, not of one New English state, but of the continent. Dwey first caught the eyes of the world by his work in the School of Education at Chicago. It was in those years that he revealed the resolute experimental bent of his thought, and now, 30 years later, his mind is still open to every new move in education, and his interest in the schools of tomorrow never flags. Perhaps his greatest book is Democracy and Education. Here he draws the varied lines of his philosophy to a point and centers them all on the task of developing a better generation. All progressive teachers acknowledge his leadership, and there is hardly a school in America that has not felt his influence. We find him active everywhere in the task of remaking the schools of the world. He spent 2 years in China lecturing to teachers on the reform of education and made a report to the Turkish government on the reorganization of their national schools. Following up Spencer's demand for more science and less literature in education, Dwey adds that even the science should not be book learning, but should come to the pupil from the actual practice of useful occupations. He has no great regard for a liberal education. The term was used originally to denote the culture of a free man, example, a man who never worked, and it was natural that such an education should be fitted rather to a leisure class in an aristocracy than to an industrial and democratic life. Now that we are nearly all of us caught up in the industrial of Europe and America, the lessons we must learn are those that come through occupation rather than through books. Scholastic culture makes for snobbishness, but fellowship in occupations makes for democracy. In an industrial society, the school should be a miniature workshop and a miniature community. It should teach through practice and through trial and error the arts and the discipline necessary for economic and social order. And finally, education must be reconceived not as merely a preparation for maturity, whence our absurd idea that it should stop after adolescence, but as a continuous growth of the mind and a continuous illumination of life. In a sense, the schools can give us only the instrumentalities of mental growth. The rest depends upon our absorption and the interpretation of experience. Real education comes after we leave school, and there is no reason why it should stop before our death. Paragraph 2. Instrumentalism. What distinguishes Dwey is the undisguised completeness with which he accepts the evolution theory. Mind as well as body is to him an organ evolved in the struggle for existence from lower forms. His starting point in every field is Darwinian. When Descartes said, "The nature of physical things is much more easily conceived when they are beheld coming gradually into existence than when they are only considered as produced at once in a finished and perfect state." The modern world became self conscious of the logic that was henceforth to control it, the logic of which Darwin's Origin of Species is the latest scientific achievement. When Darwin said of species what Galileo had said of the earth, E equals C move, he emancipated once for all genetic and experimental ideas as an organ of asking questions and looking for explanation. Things are to be explained, then not by supernatural causation, but by their place and function in the environment. Dewey is frankly naturalistic. He protests that to idealize and rationalize the universe at large is a confession of inability to master the courses of things that specifically concern us. He distrusts, too, the Schopenhauerian will and the Bergson elan. These may exist, but there is no need to worship them, for these world forces are as often as not destructive of everything that man creates and reverences. Divinity is within us, not in these neutral cosmic powers. Intelligence has descended from its lonely isolation at the remote age of things, whence it operated as a mover and ultimate good to take its scat in the moving affairs of man. We must be faithful to the earth. Like a good positivist scion of the stock of Bacon and Hobbes and Spencer and Mill, Dewey rejects metaphysics as the echo and disguise of theology. The trouble with philosophy has always been that its problems were confused with those of religion. As I read Plato, philosophy began with some sense of its essentially political basis and mission, a recognition that its problems were those of the organization of a just social order, but it soon got lost in dreams of another world. Go in German philosophy, the interest is religious problems, deflected the course of philosophic development In English philosophy, the social interest outweighed the supernatural. For 2 centuries, the war raged between an idealism that reflected authoritarian religion and feudal aristocracy, and a sensationalism that reflected the liberal faith of a progressive democracy. This war is not yet ended, and therefore we have not quite emerged from the Middle Ages. The modern era will begin only when the naturalist point of view shall be adopted in every field. This does not mean that mind is reduced to matter, but only that mind and life are to be understood not in theological but in biological terms, as an organ or an organism in an environment, acted upon and reacting, molded and molding. We must study not states of consciousness but modes of response. The brain is primarily an organ of a certain kind of behavior, not of knowing the world. Thought is an instrument of readaptation. It is an organ as much as limbs and teeth. Ideas are imagined contacts, experiments in adjustment, but this is no passive adjustment, no merely Spencerian adaptation. Complete adaptation is to environment means death. The essential point in all response is the desire to control the environment. The problem of philosophy is not how we can come to know an external world, but how we can learn to control it and remake it, and for what goals. Philosophy is not the analysis of sensation and knowledge, for that is psychology, but the synthesis and the coordination of knowledge and desire. To understand thought, we must watch it arise in specific situations. Reasoning, we perceive, begins not with premises but with difficulties. Then it conceives a hypothesis which becomes the conclusion for which it seeks the premises. Finally, it puts the hypothesis to the test of observation or experiment. The first distinguishing characteristic of thinking is facing the facts, inquiry, minute and extensive scrutinizing observation. There is a small comfort for mysticism here. And then again, thinking is so sure. It occurs not only in specific situations but in a given cultural milieu. The individual is as much a product of society as society is a product of the individual. A vast network of customs, manners, conventions, language, and traditional ideas lies ready to produce upon every newborn child to mold it into the image of the people among whom it has appeared. So rapid and thorough is the operation of this social heredity that it is often mistaken from physical biological heredity. Even Spencer believed that the Kantian categories or habits and forms of thought were native to the individual, whereas in all probability they are merely the product of the social transmission of mental habits from adults to children. In general, the role of instinct has been exaggerated and that of early training underrated. The most powerful instincts, such as sex and pugnacity, have been considerably modified and controlled by social training, and there is no reason why other instincts, like those of acquisition and mastery, should not be similarly modified by social influence and education. We must unlearn our ideas about an unchangeable human nature and an omnipotent environment. There is no knowable limit to change or growth, and perhaps there is nothing impossible, but thinking makes it so. Paragraph 3. Science and Politics. What Dwey sees and reverences as the finest of all things is growth, so much so that he makes this relative but specific notion and no absolute good his ethical criterion. Not perfection as a final goal, but the ever enduring process of perfecting, maturing, refining is the aim in living. The bad man is the man who, no matter how good he has been, is beginning to deteriorate, to grow less good. The good man is the man who, no matter how morally unworthy he has been, is moving to become better. Such a conception makes one severe in judging himself and humane in judging others. And to be good does not merely mean to be obedient and harmless. Goodness without ability is lame, and all the virtue in the world will not save us if we lack intelligence. Ignorance is not bliss, it is unconsciousness and slavery. Only intelligence can make us sharers in the shaping of our fates. Freedom of the will is no violation of causal sequences. It is the illumination of conduct by knowledge. A physician or engineer is free in his thoughts or his actions in the degree of which he knows what he deals with. Perhaps we find here the key to any freedom. Our trust must, after all, be in thought and not in instinct. How could instinct adjust us to the increasingly artificial environment which industry has built around us and the make of intricate problems in which we are enmeshed? Physical science has for the time being far outtermed physical. We have mastered the physical mechanism sufficiently to turn out possible goods. We have not gained a knowledge of the conditions through which possible values become actual in, and so are still at the mercy of habit, of haphazard, and hence of force. With tremendous increase in our control of nature, in our ability to utilize nature for human use and satisfaction, we find the actual realization of ends, the enjoyment of values, growing unassured and precarious. At times it seems as though we were caught in a contradiction. The more we multiply means, the less certain and general is the use we are able to make of them. No wonder a Carlyle or a Ruskin puts our whole industrial civilization under a ban, while a Tolstoy proclaims a return to the desert. But the only way to see the situation steadily and see it whole is to keep in mind that the entire problem is one of the development of science and its application to life. Morals, philosophy returns to its first love, love of the wisdom that inures of good, but it returns to the Socratic principle, equipped with a multitude of special methods of inquiry and tests, with an organized mass of knowledge and with control of the arrangements by which industry, law, and education may concentrate upon the problem of the participation by all men and women up to the capacity of absorption in all attained values. Unlike most philosophers, Dwey accepts democracy, though he knows its faults. The aim of political order is to help the individual to develop himself completely, and this can come only when each shares up to his capacity in determining the policy and destiny of his group. Fixed classes belong with fixed species. The fluidity of classes came at the same time as the theory of the transformation of species. Aristocracy and monarchy are more efficient than democracy, but they are also more dangerous. Dewey distrusts the state, and wishes a pluralistic order in which as much as possible of the work of society would be done by voluntary associations. He sees in the multiplicity of organizations, parties, corporations, trade unions, etc., a reconciliation of individualism with the common action. As these develop in importance, the state tends to become more and more a regulator and adjuster among them, defining the limits of their actions, preventing and setting conflicts. Moreover, the voluntary associations do not coincide with political boundaries. Associations of mathematicians, chemists, astronomers, business corporations, labor organizations, churches, and transnational because the interests they represent are worldwide. In such ways as these, internationalism is not an aspiration but a fact, not a sentimental idea but a force. Yet, these interests are cut across and thrown out of gear by the traditional doctrine of exclusive national sovereignty. It is the vogue of this doctrine or dogma that presents the strongest barrier to the effective formation of an international mind, which alone agrees with the moving forces of present day labor, commerce, science, art, and religion. But political reconstruction will come only when we apply to our social problems the experimental methods and attitudes which have succeeded so well in the natural sciences. We are still in the metaphysical stage of political philosophy. We fling abstractions at one another's heads, and when the battle is over, nothing is won. We cannot cure our social ills with wholesale ideas. Magnificent generalizations like individualism or order, democracy or monarchy or aristocracy or what not. We must meet each problem with a specific hypothesis and no universal theory. Theories are tentacles and fruitful, progressive, living must rely on trial and error. The experimental attitude substitutes detailed analysis for wholesale assertions, specific inquiries for temperamental convictions, small facts for opinions, whose site is in precise ratio to their vagueness. It is within the social sciences, in morals, politics, and education That thinking still goes on by large antitheses, by their by theoretical oppositions of order and freedom, individualism and socialism, culture and utility, spontaneity and discipline, actuality and tradition. The field of the physical sciences was once occupied by similar total views, whose emotional appeal was inversely of their intellectual clarity, but with the advance of the experimental method, the question has ceased to be which one of two rival claim, claimants has a right to the field. It has become a question of clearing up a confused subject matter by attacking it bit by bit. I do not know a case where the final result was anything like victory for one or another among the pre experimental notions. All of them disappeared because they became increasingly irrelevant to the situation discovered, and with their detected irrelevance, they became unmeaning and uninteresting. It is in this field, in this application of human knowledge to our social antagonism that the work of philosophy should lie. Philosophy clings like a timid spinster to the old fashioned problems and ideas. Direct preoccupation with contemporary difficulties is left to literature and politics. Philosophy is in flight today before the sciences, one after another of which have run away from her into the productive world, until she is left chill and alone like a forsaken mother with the vitals gone from her and almost all her cupboards empty. Philosophy has withdrawn herself timidly from her real concerns, man and their life in the world, into a crumbling corner called epistemology, and is in danger every moment of being ousted by the laws that prohibit habitation in flimsy and rickety structures. But these old problems have lost their meaning for us. We do not solve them, we get over them. They evaporate in the heat of social friction and living change. Philosophy, like everything else, must secularize itself. It must stay on the earth and earn its keep by illuminating life. What serious minded men, now engaged in the professional business of philosophy, most want to know is what modification and abandonment of intellectual inheritance are required by the new industrial, political, and scientific movements. The task of future philosophy is to clarify men's ideas as to the social and moral strives of their own day. Its aim is to become, so far as is humanly possible, an organ for dealing with these conflicts. A Catholic and far-sighted theory of the adjustment of the conflicting factors of life is philosophy. A philosophy so understood might at last produce philosophers worthy to be kings. So this part is over.